group than we had last time. So I think it would be important for us to probably go across and introduce ourselves and our relationship to the group. So if we could just go alphabetically by first name. Dr. O, I think people know who you are. So I'm going to skip you and go to Andrew Harvey. Andrew, are you in? Have you come over to the group yet? Beth Kavanaugh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Beth Kavanaugh. I'm a parent at Hosford Middle School.
Great, thanks. Oh, things are moving around. Andrew, are you here now?
I am here. I'm having computer problems.
Oh, well, we can hear you okay. Do you mind just introducing yourself and
I'm moving onto a different computer. Here wow, that's so weird. I see myself talking on the computer. Okay. God. My name's Andrew Harvey. I'm a parent of a daughter who's in Spanish immersion. I'm representing Franklin High School.
Thanks. Dee?
My name is Dee. I'm a parent of 2 kiddos in the K-5 DLI program at Bridger.
Thanks. Jackson?
Hi, I'm Jackson. I'm a student at Cleveland High School, and I went through the Chinese DLI program.
Thanks, Jackson. And I just realized I haven't been asking anyone to share pronouns. If you'd like to share pronouns with your name, please do. And I also didn't say who I am. Kristen Westfall, Area Senior Director of Middle Schools. I use she, they, and Aya. Judy, you're next. Judy Brennan, are you?
Yeah, Judy, yeah. Judy Brennan, district enrollment and transfer, she, her pronouns.
Thanks. Logan?
Hi, I'm Logan Hirely. I use she, her, Aya pronouns. I'm a guardian of a Harrison Park 8th grader and a middle school teacher at Lent.
Thanks. Misha?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Misha Plotsky. I'm the principal at Creative Science School, and I use she, her pronouns.
Michael Bacon?
Hi, Michael Bacon, Humanities Department Director of Dual Language. He, him.
And Mike Rowell.
Hi, I'm Mike Rowell, principal at Lane Middle School, and I use he, him.
Thanks. Min?
Hi, my name is Min Tai, and I'm a parent at Woodstock DOI program, and use she, her. Thank you.
Thanks. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Roberts. I'm a GIS analyst with Flow Analytics, and I use she, her pronouns.
Thanks. Director Moore?
Hi, Rita Moore, school board, and my internet is very unstable, so I'm keeping the camera off. Sorry.
Okay, thanks for joining us. Sabrina?
Sabrina Flamo, principal at Vestal. I use she, her pronouns.
Thanks. Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah. My pronouns are she, her, and I have a 6th grader at Arleta.
Thank you. Savannah?
Hi, my name is Savannah. I also use she, her pronouns, and I have a 5th grader at Creston and a freshman at Franklin.
Thank you. Seth?
Yeah, I'm Seth Johnson, principal at Woodstock Elementary, and he, him are my pronouns.
Stephen? Stephen is my wonderful co-facilitator who is taking notes this evening. Stephen, are you able to grab your mic? We'll come back to Stephen. Tanya.
Tanya Arnold, I'm the principal at Mount Tabor Middle School, she, her pronouns.
Great, thanks. And Stephen, any chance you're able to come on? And anybody that I missed?
Can you hear me?
Oh, we got you.
There was the AirPods, you know. Stephen Stapleton, Area Senior Director. I support elementary schools in the Cleveland Franklin cohort. And thank you. I have note taker, as Kristen said.
Great, thanks. So we've been charged with looking at 2 scenarios, and I'm going to go ahead and print my, or not print, but present my screen. I will not print it, so that we can see those 2 scenarios, which are E and F. And let me see if I can increase the size a little bit. and move where we're displaying. So we're looking at E and F over here, which are Marysville, Woodstock, and Creston feeding to Kellogg with Chinese DLI, 2 strands from Hosford, and then Lint, Marysville, and Creston feeding to Kellogg with Spanish DLI, 1 strand at Lint. So what we're being asked to do is to use the RSJ lens to consider these options and answer the questions. So I'm going to stop presenting for a second so that I can make sure everybody has access to this. I'll drop it into the chat. And then Stephen, maybe if you want to present your screen so that we can see the notes and just walk through them. And here's this document. Oh, thanks, Stephen. So the first one that we're looking at is option E. And so if you don't already have it pulled up, if you just want to click the link and pull it up so you can reference it easily. The first thing that we want to consider are what are the implications for racial equity and social justice with this option. So whether that's positive or negative. And we should include thinking about feedback that we've heard from the community. We should think about the articles that we read, all the different data that we have access to. And I invite anybody to jump in.
I wanted to just point out that because this scenario was added the last in per my request, because the original E missing some data in there, and also knowing that Kellogg is the central location for all the DOIs, I guess, for people of color. So that's why it's put there. And I do wanted to mention that, as Jet pointed out in the email, that this meant to also have the Chinese DOI from the Harrison Park. The reason he's not included is because that DOI is only at 4th grade. So it's not going to be in next year. So that's the only reason it's not in there. So I wanted to make sure that that's pointed out. And so, so I guess I mentioned the reason it's having all the DOIs there is because it's a central location for everybody. If we look at the, you know, really talking about travel and commute, things like that.
Great, thank you. And I know Stephen was busy popping stuff into the chat, but is about to start note taking in a second.
We're on E, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things I would say, and I think this would apply to F as well, is I think that this is the wrong time to consider where Creston is going, because Creston could potentially flow to another middle school if we need it to in phase 2.
Sorry, just 1 second. I just want to make sure that what Min said was captured first. Min, would you mind letting us know kind of, it sounds like what you wanted to share was it's central, a central location for DLI programming. Was there another piece that you wanted to make sure was captured there?
So the Harrison Park DOI was meant to also fit into Kellogg.
And do you see that as having a negative or positive implication related to racial equity and social justice?
It would be positive. I mean, if we're talking about the distance, but I think there's other, when you ask each group what's most important when they choose a school, I think that you probably hear different things.
Sure. And just sorry to ask a little bit more, the positive implication is because of the central location, or is it because of something else?
Central location, yes.
Okay. Which means not as many difficulties with transportation, is that?
Yeah, I think it will be easier if that is the most important factor people considering choosing the school.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure that we had fully captured what you were sharing. Andrew, you were sharing, but I wanted to make sure that we caught those notes.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to, say what the implications for Res J with this option are, just because I think anything you do has an implication. What I was beginning to talk about, it may just be the wrong time, is that Creston may limit certain opportunities by including including Creston right now in our decision making, which may down the road have impacts. through the ResJ lens. So I think preserving options as we get to phase 2 is important.
Can you be more specific about which opportunities would be limited?
Well, basically enrollment, like what the feeder patterns to the school might be. So if we put Creston in and make a commitment to those students right now, then if there's a decision made later about other schools that may need to go there to support the ResJ lens, that wouldn't be possible. So I think that not moving too fast and taking one's time and being considered and thoughtful supports the ResJ lens.
Thanks. I'm going to call on Jackson as our only student member. Jackson, what are your thoughts around the implications for RESJ with option E?
I think honestly that's a really hard question for me to answer, especially as like a white student representing a majority white school. I don't live in the community that is affected, so, and I'm also not in the grade level that would be affected. So I think for me personally, it's really hard for me to try to provide comments on this just because I'm so far removed from the realities of living in that area or identifying with those, with the demographics that would be affected that we're trying to limit through the ResJ lens.
Thank you. And I see that Sarah shared in the chat that this takes away a central location for Spanish DLI to come together. And Sarah, can you say more about the implications for RESJ? Sarah, are you able to unmute for a second? Okay. No worries. And feel free to also put it in the chat. And I know that Stephen also shared the link to the document. So if folks want to type ideas directly into the document, you're also welcome to do that.
Could I ask Sarah a question really quick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because Harrison Park, it seems, could also serve a Spanish DLI program potentially down the road.
I would chime in on the RSJ piece for the DLI, the two DLIs. I would say that, I think one piece that came back in the feedback is sort of like balancing transition against sort of like locational convenience. And I think for the Chinese immersion, they're currently at Hosford at Cleveland, and that seemed to be a solution that was both workable from a numbers and logistics standpoint, but also seemed to be preferred for that community. Whereas for the Spanish community, there is no central middle school location. All of those schools have, other than Atkinson, none of those schools have had a middle school experience, the Bridger DLI program, nor the Lentz DLI program. Those kids in Bridger in particular, we've had sort of a very overcrowded, sort of very unpleasant middle school experience for the last 5 to 8 years. And so I think sort of based on the fact that Chinese, and Min, please jump in if I'm not speaking correctly for you, that if there's a location that the Chinese program is happy with and seems to work for them, and the Kellogg location seems to work really well for the existing Spanish DLI. It just feels like the RESJ for both communities feels more balanced that way. And, I'm speaking from Bridger, where our capacity to have a middle school at Bridger for another year just does not exist. And so it feels really imminent for us for this process to not get dragged out for another couple of years because we have kids, having classes in the gym. And so it's just, our space needs are imminent.
Thanks, Dee. And I'm seeing that several folks have put things in the chat. So Logan said that Harrison Park doesn't have middle school Chinese DLI yet. Hosford wouldn't be preferred for those families from what I've heard. And Beth said that committing to assign Creston to Kellogg could mean that we're unable to consider feedback from the diverse and historically underserved community at Harrison Park, that Franklin is their preferred feeder school for many reasons because of overcrowding. And I just want to check, I know that we have to look at 2 different scenarios, and I'm thinking that I'm thinking that we may want to move on to the next question, which gets a little bit more specific about how each demographic group will be impacted.
Can I just add, so just to respond to what Dee said, and yes, the Chinese, at least the Chinese community in Woodstock would prefer to go to Hosford. So really, I think being the center, proposing to be in Kellogg versus Harrison Park, I guess, because Harrison Park, it is on the very east side of the city, and we have families coming from Southwest and all over Southeast. So it's really not a location for convenient for, I mean, it's convenient. It's not convenient at all because we just don't have a neighborhood school to begin with for most of us. So, but right now, here's Hosford is working very well. So most of the Chinese families would be happy staying in Hosford and not to having to move anywhere else. And now I think we do need to hear from Harrison Park families what their preferences, because I have not personally, well, I did hear through a friend, and one of the family says, yes, we can go to Hosford, but again, I didn't hear from the rest of, so I don't want to assume that's the majority. So, and I do know that Harrison Park, as a school, they wanted to stay there, but the school's preference is different from like individual groups. So I would really be interested to learn if the Harrison Park Chinese community, would they really wanted to go? I mean, like, would they love to join at Hosford? So, I mean, if that's the case, then we really solve the problem, not having to trying to figure out the 2 DOIs in Kellogg. Also, I think then keep Hosford more diverse than otherwise, wider. So thank you.
And then I just could add one more thing to the Kellogg placement.
Can I say something really quick and then jump back in? I want to move us on in a second because I want to make sure we have a chance to look at both scenarios, and we haven't answered any of the specific questions that get at demographic groups, unintended consequences, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that we start moving down there. And I also want to invite folks that haven't spoken yet to speak. Dee, do you want to pop in?
Yeah, just to address the unintended consequences thing, it's sort of another factor in the Harrison Park versus the Kellogg choice for Spanish is that just the feeling of segregation that the Latinx community is feeling seems to be locationally based. Just the idea of being in a neighborhood that currently politically and socially seems to be hostile to the Latinx community. I think that generally speaking, the feedback was that a more central location felt sort of safer and like a better solution.
Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat that we only have 10 minutes remaining for one thing, so we may only make it through one scenario. Beth had
Can we
said
request more time so we actually get through it?
Can we what? Sorry, Andrew?
Request more time so we can do both scenarios? We don't have time. Yes.
We can definitely request more time. One of the things that was said in the chat, Misha says that one of the documents that came out, 51% students of color and 49% white students sorry, Misha, I wasn't clear what that related to. Was that about Harrison Park?
So I was just trying to look at the document. I don't know if anyone else saw it. It was option E, and it said it's the document that PPS staff through the RJ lens. And so I was wondering, this is for option E. It says what are the implications for the RESJ with each scenario, and it just I think it was referring to Kellogg, right? Configurations, results. I guess I was just trying to also get clarification. The document just came out today with the email. Do you know which document I'm talking about?
Rachel from Flow, are you in the room?
I can't see you guys. There you are.
Yeah, and I have the document pulled up as well. I'd like to point out that we sent out, I think, an updated guiding coalition option guide because I think Min and Jed maybe made some changes to option E. And so just looking at it right now, the percent of students that would be white at Kellogg is at 39%.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to point that out as thinking about the neighborhood and through the RESJ lens of trying to I just see it as a positive thing. And my other thing that I keep coming back to, I know we want to talk about DLI, but I haven't heard the neighborhood kids and those feeders come up as much. And I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are.
Thanks, Misha. And I'm wondering if folks can address the question of how each demographic group will be impacted and think about the proposed feeders, so each of them. and demographic groups within those feeders. So if that's, whether that's by race or language group. And Sarah is saying in the chat that not having Spanish combined at Kellogg takes away a great chance for them to come together without segregating them to outer Southeast.
Not having Spanish combined.
Rachel, did that document come back out this afternoon that Min and you said Jed maybe worked on?
Yes, so that includes all the different options, and it includes like the little infographics with the schools, the written description that I think you were looking at earlier, that PPS staff went through the ResJ lens has not been updated.
Can I get some clarity on when it says PPS staff, who that means?
Is Kristen or Judy?
I know that it was sent to, I think, most of the district staff who are in the Southeast Guiding Coalition, but I don't know who the people are who actually completed it. Judy, do you know how many folks that was or who it was?
Yeah, it was broadly sent out to people who were on the planning committee and then the facilitators as well. And it was just, we just included whatever was submitted and agreed that this particular scenario was the only one that changed after the analysis was done.
Judy, do you know how many folks contributed to?
I think it was 5.
Okay, thanks. Sarah's asking for clarity. This option at E, send all of Woodstock to Kellogg or just DLI? Rachel,
I thought it was all Woodstock. Min, does that sound appropriate? I mean, Min helped, was the primary designer, I think.
This has been so much change to this. It originally wasn't, the original document, the scenario is to have the full Woodstock, but now we're adding all the DOIs into it. So really, I think the baseline is to put in the DOI there, and then we're adding neighborhood strands or neighborhood schools based on what the enrollment number looks like.
Can I ask a question here?
Just as timekeeper, let me just say before you do that we're at 6 minutes. We're at 7 minutes. We're going to go back at 7:10.
Thank you.
Could somebody maybe talk a little bit about the Creston situation? Because I have a hard time understanding. I guess what I really have a hard time understanding is Creston not going to Kellogg geographically. So I know a couple people have broached that idea, like we should talk about that one later, but I'm not sure I'm convinced about that.
Unless somebody else wants to, I can address. I did an analysis based on the enrollment numbers from elementary schools that Jed sent out today, looking at, in order to get Franklin's, and this is where this is coming from for me, looking at how to get Franklin's enrollment to a manageable level. And I know that the Harrison Park community has been really prioritizing Franklin as the safest and the safest feeder for their school. And so I was looking at if Harrison, how many schools can feed into Franklin basically. And so looking at which schools actually could feasibly feed to more than one, Franklin or another school, looking at the numbers. And I got concerned, and based on these numbers, that if Creston is assigned to Franklin, then that limits our ability to possibly send Harrison Park there. So not to say that, so I guess what I'm suggesting is we don't assign Creston now. When we look at the phase 2 broader implications for Franklin's enrollment, if it's possible to have Creston and another school of those that sort of could go more than one direction, then we could talk about it then. But by committing to Creston at Franklin now, we could be eliminating other underserved populations from being able to go there.
There's a question in the chat from Dee about how we're applying the RESJ lens, and are we making an assumption that a Kellogg assignment is more positive than an assignment somewhere else? I don't think that we should assume that. I think that we should be looking at what communities have said, and specifically communities of color, historically underserved communities, communities who are linguistically diverse. And I think something else that we want to be careful about is that we don't necessarily want to have diversity for the sake of diversity if that's not what communities of color are saying is best for kids. So we don't want to do it because it's great for white kids to have more kids of color in the school, or for there to be just like more balance, as like, obviously it's good for folks to have lots of interactions with other folks who have different life experiences. And at the same time, we also want to make sure that we're reflecting what the community says is best for that community. Because there are lots of good reasons too why kids may want to be, families may want for their kids to be with other folks from the same community.
And I'll also add to what Beth said, because I completely agree with what she's saying about preserving options in terms of feeder patterns to Franklin. We are moving very fast, and I am very nervous that we haven't had an opportunity to really consider the bigger picture of phase 2 and what we're trying to do. I think we have to figure out how to protect the students and not reverse a decision that we make, taking them to one place one year and to another place the following year. And baby steps seem appropriate in today's, just with today's like pandemic that's going on, with our inability to hold real meetings where we're all talking together in person, and with the fact that we have not had an opportunity to look in detail at phase 2.
So I understand what Beth and Andrew are saying. I realize I'm in a group where this is a popular idea, but I actually disagree with holding off with Creston and having them go to Hosford and Cleveland. My reasoning is, when I look at the phase 2 implications, it doesn't help Madison at all. And there's just no way like Creston could somehow feed to Madison, as well as Lane will be under enrolled. And I can't really imagine Creston going to Lane, whereas like Arleta, that's kind of almost directly in the center of Kellogg and Lane, possibly could. I'd be more curious to look at like Mount Tabor maybe going to Madison when I'm thinking about the broader implications in phase 2. So I personally don't agree with that.
I hope you didn't misunderstand what I said. I wasn't saying that Creston should not go to Kellogg, just that we could make that decision.
No, I understand what you're saying, Andrew.
Cool. Okay.
I really do. I'm just thinking about the document Beth sent and the broader implications, and it just actually feels like Arleta, Mount Tabor, Glencoe, there's other schools that actually provide a little bit more creativity if we're thinking more broadly than Creston, in my opinion.
Savannah, I want to make sure we didn't miss the beginning of what you said in the notes. You said something about Hosford and phase 2 implications, and I think that got missed in the beginning of the notes. Can you let us know?
Well, I just don't understand how sending, like if we're thinking about the phase 2 implication, Lane being, you know, under enrolled and Madison being under enrolled, I actually don't think Creston going to Hosford and Cleveland helps at all with those implications, nor can I see Creston somehow feeding to Lane or making its way to Madison. So to me, it doesn't seem like the best option in trying to think about phase 2 implications and keeping things kind of open. I think Arleta makes more sense, or Mount Tabor changing, you know, instead of going to Franklin, perhaps going to.
Hey everybody. So here's how we're going to do this to make sure that we all have a chance to look at everything that we need to and to do our own processing. We're going to take about 8 minutes for us to look at all of the documents. Actually, let's say around 10 minutes for us to look at all of the documents, and then to actually rank on your own what you think is the best scenario and the worst scenario, and give a justification for both. And I'm going to put that into the chat. So again, we're going to be taking 10 minutes to look at all the documents and the notes from the other groups, and then on your own, identify what you think is the best scenario and the worst scenario with a rationale for both. So we'll come back to talk at 7:55, and I'll again put those instructions in the chat.
So are we not going to basically kind of discuss about the options and add or remove some of the elements? We're just gonna vote because
No, we're not voting. What we need to do is take some time for everybody to process, because it's, I don't know about you, but I know for me and for a lot of folks, it's really hard to talk and look at stuff and think through it at the same time. And so we're definitely going to be talking. What we want to do is just get our own processing done and then be able to talk about it after that. So this is not like one of those straw polls of like, what do you think? This is just for your own processing, like, where are you at, so that we can then have the conversation all together. And I see that there's a question about, can we recommend a change to an option? I don't know that that's going to be considered at this point, but you can certainly ask when we're back in the big group, and I'll also ask it in the facilitator chat. So just to clarify, I just want to make sure everybody understands that the answer is yes to proposing modifications after hearing from the entire group. So we can talk about that when we come back in 7 minutes. So as we're coming to the last minute or so, we're going to ask that you put your first and worst choices with rationale in the notes doc that Stephen shared, because we want to make sure that we can receive all the information from everybody. And I don't know if we're going to have time in the small group to get through all of those pieces at once unless folks drop them in.
If everyone wants to claim a bullet, I kind of created a bullet for so you wouldn't type on top of each other there.
And that's for question number 2, Stephen? Oh, sorry, not question number 2. Where did you?
I just put out that first and worst choice with rationale. I just put it at the bottom of the document. But does that make sense? Is that good?
Yep.
Okay.
That's great.
Cool.
And that way folks can look at those as we come back to talk about the other questions. So it's 7:55, so it is time for us to come back. And so I'm going to ask that we take the next minute or so that folks can type into those bullets that Stephen has created at the bottom of the notes document, your first and worst with rationale. And then we'll talk through the other questions so that we can make sure that we have a chance to get to them while we're together. And I want to clarify that principals are also invited to be part of this. I know that sometimes principals are voting members and sometimes they are not, but principals are also invited to share your best and worst picks and the rationale for that. Stephen, if folks are putting stuff in the chat, would you mind just grabbing them and dropping them into the notes? Thanks.
On it.
Oh, you already responded. Nice.
You have to remind me though, because I have a headache right now.
I got it. I know that folks are continuing to type. I want to give us about 30 more seconds to finish that. And I'm noticing that we're kind of all over the board. And Stephen, I know we talked about in the pre-time in question number 2 that it wasn't going to be about what we prefer, but what we hear from the community. Like what's the best option? Can we change the wording on that one? All right, so I want to make sure we have a chance to talk a bit. So I know people are continuing to type, but we are going to come back together. People have said quite a few different things. My first choices are options A and B, first choice C, somebody else says A and B, option D. C, B, A, D, C, E. So again, kind of all over the board. We were asked to consider what makes sense in terms of DLI programs. And I invite you to either respond aloud or to drop your response into the notes.
I think, are we doing that right now?
Yep, go for it.
I think that it makes a lot of sense for Spanish DLI to be at Kellogg, since there's currently so many Spanish DLI kids that are on both sides of that school. Whereas if they were at Harrison Park, which I assume would be the option, the other possibility for a Spanish DLI program in middle school, that's quite far away from the inner Southeast.
Okay, thank you. Other folks on that question? All right, let's skip on we're not very compelled by that question. Let's skip on to question 3. Well, actually, we'll skip that one because we didn't have very many responses to 2. What about how many neighborhood feeder schools should be at Kellogg in phase 1? What are our thoughts there?
I think that if we only assigned 3, that gives us a better chance of not locking in inequitable unintended consequences for phase 2, and gives us a better chance of making sure that Kellogg
maybe I'll let people see, but I think that once we put some more mind to it, we'll be able to move them around. It's just
I'm really wondering how this is really like a Harrison Park enrollment is going to be like, because we're basically all the close schools are moving to Kellogg. So who's going to feed into Harrison Park? I think without talking about it, so I can't vote on anything because we're basically leaving Harrison Park on the road. I mean, under.
You're feeling like none of the options are working for that reason?
I just don't know, like they're so, I mean, without like changing things, I guess, put it that way. I guess you can, you know, Marysville is close to Harrison Park as well. Bridger is close to Harrison Park. And so most of the, you know, these are in those proposals. So I feel it's hard. Yeah.
And I see that there's a lot of conversation happening in the chat, some about Harrison Park, that the options are Clark Vestal, Bridger Atkinson neighborhood, Japanese immersion. There's some discussion with Beth and Logan about Marysville, and if Marysville would have to cross over Lent's boundary to reach Harrison Park, and what the implications for D. And a question for Rachel about the population of Kellogg if Marysville is added to option D.
Sorry, I was just working on the option. I can take a look into that really quickly if you guys give me a moment.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Where my head hits the wall on this whole discussion is with Harrison Park, because I go back and forth on that one. And if you took all of the Spanish immersion schools and put them together, so Lent, Atkinson, and Bridger, and you brought them to Harrison Park, the school's overpopulated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a fail. And as a white man in the Atkinson community, I have felt that on a certain level, and though my wife, who is Spanish, does not agree with me, that because of the privilege of the Atkinson community, that going to Harrison Park may be our time, you know, because it's not a new school, and there are other people that have been disadvantaged and need opportunity. But Harrison Park's just a problem in general because it's oddly located, and we can almost cover everything. We talked about this yesterday, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but it's like, if we don't do the right thing, then Harrison Park is under enrolled.
Thank you.
And all those other schools are so close to Kellogg, but so is Atkinson and so is Bridger. They're all kind of equally distanced.
One thing that I'm noticing, oh, never mind.
I just saw that too. I was like, where are all the rest of the options? There we go.
Oh, did we take a poll?
There's a poll that's open that people are not expected to have responded to yet, but that they can respond to whenever they're ready.
So I'm wondering,
How do you respond? I'm sorry.
Stephen dropped in the chat. Let me scroll back up and I'll grab
I'll
the.
find it. Thank you.
If you're in the chat, you can just rank them there. If one of the options isn't what you want, then you can note that and then put it in the comments. This is just kind of to help make sense for our group. And you know, if you're looking at the data, it is kind of confusing, but each little increment is one number one ranking if it's blue. So there's one ranking for B, there's 2 number 1 rankings for C. And then as we go on, you can see there's 2, and that's a 3 ranking for option B. And it's harder to see on this. It'd be better once everything's complete, you can download it. But option F has 4, people put it as number 5. So that's just kind of how that works there. Hope that makes a little more sense.
Thank you.
Can you scroll right again for just a second? Thank you. I was just noticing that E and F seem to be overall less popular, although it's somebody's number 1. I was looking back at the notes, and from the things that people wrote in the notes, there wasn't anything indicating that folks liked E or F. So I was wondering if those might be some that we look towards eliminating, at least F, since somebody's first choice is E.
am I correct that the only difference between A and B is where the Atkinson Spanish DLI is housed in K5?
Let me take a look back at it.
Well, also B has a split feeder pattern.
And I think those changes are all in the phase 2 of what happens, but I think the phase 1 of how it originally populates Kellogg is the same between both A and B.
Yeah. Are there, I know that there's been dialogue going on in the chat. Are there any things that folks wanted to have reflected aloud or needed a question answered? I was trying to scroll back through and see if there was anything that we missed.
Can we look at the comments, the one response comment? Yeah, thank you.
And in case it's small for folks, it says, well, I would like to see Arleta, Creston, Marysville, and Lint all feed to Kellogg. I recognize we have issues with Franklin overcrowding. While sending Arleta to Lane under any circumstance does not help Franklin overcrowding at all, sending Creston to Hosford and Cleveland would take overcrowding pressure off. But I would prefer we prioritize the K8s switching back to K5s. D leaves out the newly K5s too much, and I would like to exclude E and F entirely. And then somebody else wrote, I voted for C first, with the modification that all Spanish DLI is added in phase 1, or at minimum, Bridger's Spanish immersion to solve Bridger's overcrowding right away.
And we can see these at a right now, this is a global overview, but this gives us this option to go to individual, individual responses. So this person obviously didn't create notes, but the person who did, we would be able to see their entire ranking whenever we got to, I'll just show you, for example. So for this one, whoever had that one, we see the attached notes.
Hey, Stephen, could you go to the settings and make it so that we can see people's results? The little settings cog.
Right here?
Yeah. At the end, there's the see summary charts and text responses, and if you check that, we can see them too.
Oh, on the where I make it. Okay.
No, in the cog you were just in.
Oh, okay. So tell me where to go right here.
Yeah, and the last checkbox there. Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
So one thing that, you know, we keep talking about Franklin, and Franklin is important, and enrollment does need to drop, but there are other ways to drop enrollment at Franklin, and I know they're not popular with, let's say, the community over at Mount Tabor. They're not popular with friends of mine that are over there. But also, it doesn't, I don't know that just because a school's traveling to Kellogg, that school must feed to Franklin. And that I would say that's true also when Harrison Park opens up. So I don't think we're locking ourselves into that, but where I do feel like we might lock ourselves in are on boundaries, because what we don't want to be doing is changing boundaries and then having students that are enrolled in Kellogg or end up enrolled in Kellogg end up having to go somewhere else the following year. That doesn't seem acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, do you mind scrolling back over again? Thanks. Is that one first choice for E, F, and a different option? Yeah. So far it does look like D through F are significantly less popular for the people that have voted so far than A through C. That doesn't necessarily mean that's how everybody feels, but so far the folks who've entered are reporting that.
Yeah, if I'm looking at the interpretation, it looks like C has 6 number 1 votes, and then option for number 2, option A has the most number 2 votes, and then option B has the most votes in place of number 3. Looking at that.
It seems so that option A, and you know, there's on the chart it's broken down to B1, B2, B3, which is confusing to me, but those options seem to be pretty high enrollment on A and B, which is going to immediately create big problems, because we know that the enrollment's going to go up in those schools, which is one of the reasons I shied away from them. But I'm just kind of curious whether people are looking at those enrollment numbers.
Beth is pointing out in the chat that if you combine first and second choices, A has 9 and C has 8. Although if you combine first, second, and third choices, I think C is more popular overall. Judy's pointing out that we're coming back to the main group in 5 minutes. I'm wondering if there are folks who would like to share some things that have not shared, or if folks who needed some more time to process and hear from other folks feel that they may want to indicate their preferred choices at this point.
I liked C because it seemed to leave the most flexibility for phase 2. And if I'm incorrect in that assumption or that understanding, I'd love for somebody to give me a different perspective, but that's why I ranked option C as high as I did.
Thanks, Logan.
That's the way I see it too, as well as sort of highlighting or centering our current K-8 current K-8 schools.
So as I read it, option C doesn't change Creston to a K5, it leaves it as a K8. Is that correct?
Let me go there 1 second.
For next year, yeah, that it's in phase 1. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I was just thinking about enrollment for that school, and I feel like if Creston stays a K8, they're just a bigger school. I think if they lose their middle school, they might have less than 200 kids.
Does anybody know how, like, you know, if there's 70% BIPOC people in option C going to the school, is that what the BIPOC community wants to see, is majority BIPOC folks at the school?
Well, I think it probably
that-
depends on which
I
part of
wouldn't
which
say-
community and which people within the community too.
And I would go back to the earlier statement that it's one thing to sort of artificially create a BIPOC community. It's another thing when the natural feeder schools to that community result in a BIPOC population that's at that level. And so to me, C reflects the actual diversity in the neighborhood as opposed to, because it is centered on the neighborhood feeders that are proximate to Kellogg. That was my interpretation of it.
Thanks, Steve.
I just, the reason I asked, because I heard in my room during the open house that, you know, that some people didn't want that.
I think that that was the idea of being forced into a different part of town that wasn't desirable. This is sort of being in the part of town that you're already in. And I feel like that's a pretty big distinction.
It was from people in Lent, which is already a pretty large BIPOC community. So they didn't want to all be in Lent.
Rachel just dropped some other summary stats into the chat for scenario C, no Lent. Thanks, Rachel.
Andrew, was that though based on the all Spanish at Lents though? Was that the specific?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I guess maybe I might be working on the wrong assumption that that is off the table based on the neighborhood feedback, but
I would hope so.
Were there summary stats that were option C, but with the rest of Spanish DLI added?
I am working on that.
Okay.
Oh,
Would
cool.
I pass it along to
want to
Judy
miss it.
get to you?
I think it comes out to like 800 almost.
That is option C, not the phase 1 version, but that's option C as you received it.
This is?
Option C is all DLI and 3 neighborhood feeder schools, not including Preston.
Then 569 is the number then. I added that up already.